right. Well, shalom everybody, and welcome to Beginning Hebrew. This is week 6. We're quickly nearing the end of the alphabet. The notes for this class you can find online at theregathering.com/page/PFT Hebrew 1. You do have to have a regathering.com account in order to access those. They're the same as the notes you have physically in front of you. And also past classes you can find on YouTube on the Passion for Truth video channel. Just look for Hebrew class on there and you should be able to bring it up. There's also a lot of other great videos on all sorts of topics on there. All right. Well, we are on week 6, so I'm going to do a quick review of the alphabet thus far. Although you don't need to know the alphabet thus far in order to understand this class. So, anyone who knows it, say it with me as I go through. Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samech, Ayin, Pei. All right. And as I mentioned, we've gone through 4 of the 5 final letters. The Kaf has a final form at the end of a word. The Mem has a final form. The Nun has a final form. And the Pei has a final form. Okay? So again, you will always find those forms when they are the last letter in a word. Okay? Any questions about the alphabet thus far? Anything that's been confusing from past weeks? Okay, very good. We will move on to our next letter then. And that letter is the Tzadi. I don't believe there's a correct way to spell Tzadi, but this is my approximation. You'll see it all sorts of ways. TZ, just a Z, just an S. The Tzadi makes a kind of funny sound, but it is a sound that we use. You can describe it as a TS or a TZ. And it's the sound that you find in the word pizza. P-I-Z-Z-A. Pizza. So that's a great way to remember it, is the tz in pizza. It's just you'll find it at the beginning of words, so you'll say tz at the beginning of a word that starts with the Tzadi. Yes?
I was taught in German class that the Z itself is pronounced like the TS in cats.
Oh, okay. So in German, the Z is actually pronounced just like a Tzadi then.
So they don't have necessarily a Zayin and then Tzadi, but they would have just the letter Z, but it's pronounced TS.
Okay.
Like in cats.
Well, very good. Well, perhaps the Germans took some inspiration from the Semitic languages, ironically enough. I'm very much German, so I can make jokes about them, I think. All right, the numerical value of Tzadi is 90. And the Tzadi has a final form as well. It is the final letter. So this is a regular Tzadi. And a final Tzadi extends below the line like this. It looks something like that. In Paleo-Hebrew, the Tzadi looks something like that. And the Hebrew word, there are 2 Hebrew words that could be the basis of this pictogram. One is the word tzadi, which means a hunter. So this could be a man crouching, ready to strike at his prey. Or there's a word tzaddik, which means a righteous man. So this could be a man kneeling to pray. The Tzadi does not have an English equivalent per se. It is possible that it became the Greek psi, which makes a PS sound instead of a TS sound. If it is the psi, it's out of order. Doesn't occur in the regular order like Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, and a lot of other sequences in the Hebrew language match sequences in the Greek. So if indeed the psi came from Tzadi, it's way out of order. But it's possible, just not, I don't say that with as much confidence as I say the derivations of other Greek letters. And as I said, there's no English equivalent. Tzadi has no English counterpart. Yes, either a hunter or a righteous man, or perhaps some combination of the two. Okay, so that is the Tzadi. Our next letter is the Kof, or the Kuf. You will see it both ways. I'm not sure that one is more accurate than the other. The Kuf makes the same sound as the Kaf with the Dagesh, K. However, you'll frequently find it transliterated as a Q. It may be that at one time the sounds were subtly different from one another. I prefer to do it this way just so you know in a transliteration whether the letter in question is a Kaf or a Kuf. But they do make the same K sound. Numerical value is 100. And as I mentioned, it is the one letter besides the final letters that extends below the normal line of writing. So this is a kind of a scale image of a Kuf next to a Kaf. You see this tail extends below the regular line. The Kuf in Paleo-Hebrew, you'll see it like this or like this. And it's something of a mystery what the Kuf represents. There are a number of different ideas. The Hebrew word kof means a monkey, and I don't believe that that's what this picture is meant to represent. So the two main thoughts that I've heard are it could be the back of the head, back of a man's head, or it could be a setting sun. There are a lot of Kuf words that pertain to the passage of time, and so it's thought that maybe the setting sun, the twilight, the boundary between night and day is kind of the thought that's surrounding this letter. But since there's not a Hebrew word that, other than monkey, which I can't really equate to anything in Hebraic thought, the monkey's not really a Semitic culture kind of icon. So it's hard to say. Yes?
Considering the time element, is there something that used the alignment of Saturn as far as time?
Yeah, as you mentioned, the planet Saturn. Quite possibly, although it'd be quite interesting if they knew that Saturn had rings back then. I suspect that a few people did, because they knew that Pleiades had 7 stars, even though you can only see 6 of them with the naked eye. So anyway, whatever the case, it's a bit of a mystery to me. I kind of hesitate to give a final answer as to what exactly it means, but I do like the setting sun idea. That seems to be the most match the pictogram the most closely. The Kuf looks exactly like the Greek phi, but the Greek phi makes an F sound, so I'm not sure how that came into being. So I'm not sure if it became the Greek phi, but I'm pretty confident it did become the Latin Q, because it makes the same sound and looks very similar.
Between the evenings? That's something.
Oh, yeah, the Kuf is actually not a part of that phrase. It's Bain Ha or Bayim, which doesn't involve a Kuf at all, but there are other words. There are other words that do involve a Kuf that have to do with. It's not all Kuf words. It's just a few that kind of have to do with time passing. Trying to think of a few offhand. and I can't, they're kind of more obscure words. The common Kuf words are words like koreh, which means to read or to call. Kayin means jealousy. It's the origin of the name Cain, the first, Adam and Eve's first son. So those are the ones you'd see them. Kodesh, which means holy or sanctified, set apart. So obviously the time connection to those is kind of difficult to derive. So it's some more obscure words that people are drawing these meanings from. So Kuf is a bit of an oddball in that regard, or maybe it's just that, historically it's been a little bit obscured. Yes.
If it could be Kodesh, then it would be the separation of clean and unclean, or holy and unclean.
That is an excellent point. Kodesh is a separation between holy and unholy, holy and profane. So that is a valid option. So, but anyway, I encourage you to do your own research on the Kuf. It's very interesting. Okay, so that is the Kuf. And with the Kuf and the Tzadi, I can introduce a highly significant word. This is a Tzadi, the Patach underneath, followed by a Dalet with a Dagesh, a Chirik under the Dalet, followed by a Yod, and last of all a Kuf. And this is pronounced, got the Tza of the Tzadi, the A of the Patach, D of the Dalet. Chirik plus Yod is a long E sound, which usually is transliterated as just an I. And then the K or the Q of the Kuf. So Tzaddik. And Tzaddik is a righteous man, or a righteous one, rather. It could be a woman. A righteous one. And just a side note on the term righteous, Deuteronomy 6 gives some definition to righteousness. There shall be a righteousness if we keep all of these laws. Deuteronomy 6:25, I believe it is, that gives a pretty absolute definition to righteousness. However, if you look through a lot of the laws pertaining to like civil cases, the person who is innocent is called the tzaddik, and the person who is guilty is called rasha, which is wicked. Okay, so that in an absolute sense it means innocent and guilty. Okay, tzaddik is innocent and rasha, which is wicked, means guilty, the guilty party and the innocent party. So it doesn't mean somebody who is absolutely pure, and rasha doesn't mean somebody who's absolutely evil, but it means in that particular case, what's being decided, one is innocent and one is guilty. Rashan, yes. This would be the opposite of tzaddik, resh, shin. Oh, I haven't gone over shin yet, so that's why I haven't covered this word yet. Okay, so this is... Yeah, no, it's Rashang. Yeah, I'm pronouncing the ang of the ayin. Right. Okay, and that's a wicked one, opposite of a righteous one. Okay. So it takes a little of the mystery out of another way of saying righteous is justified. So when you see the term justification in the New Testament, you can equate it with tzaddik. So it takes a little of the mystery out of that. What does it mean to be justified? What does it mean to have, the righteousness of Yeshua? Well, it means you're innocent. It means you're clear. Yes?
Question. I would have done that word from what you said in a previous class with the ayin having an NG, that means sound. I would have done it R-A, the S-H-A, with the NG on it. Would that have been wrong? What would I come up with like that?
That would have been fine. You just won't. The reason I do it this way is because that's generally how it's done. If I were in charge of how things were transliterated, it'd look a little bit different. We wouldn't have this CH business, and But because this is how you're going to see it, I might as well get you used to it now because I can't change that.
So when
The only time you'll ever see another letter for the ayin is when you'll see the G at the beginning of a word like Gaza or Gomorrah. You'll find the G there. And it'll make you think it's a gimel, but it's not. It's in fact an ayin. But yeah, usually in the middle or at the end of a word you won't find any transliteration for an ayin. Maybe you'll find an apostrophe. So
how do you technically pronounce Gomorrah with the ayin?
Gomorrah.
Gomorrah.
It's like swallowing your tongue while saying Amora. The ayin is the most subtle sound and the most difficult sound to pronounce, in my opinion. Although some people have trouble with the chait as well, the ch. But I think that one's a little easier because
it's easier to spit than to swallow.
It's easier to spit than to swallow your tongue. Yes. And also you hear the ch a lot more. You'll even hear it in other languages, whereas that kind of gulping sound you probably won't hear in many other languages. So, but anyway, so this is tzaddik, righteous one, and also there's a related word to tzaddik. So a tzadi with a shva vowel underneath it. And a dalet with a komets. A kuf, again with a komets. And a hey at the end. I don't believe I've actually covered the shva vowel yet, have I? No. Okay. Well, I think that's next week I've got the shva scheduled for. For purposes of this word, consider it to be silent, or just a very small, very slight E sound. Okay, sort of a little pause between the tzadi and the dalet. So tzd. Okay. So tzadi. So tzd. Then we have the a, the a of the komets, the k of the kuf, the a of the komets, and the hey at the end is silent. So tzedakah. Tzedakah is how this would be pronounced. And tzedakah means righteousness, the state of being righteous. And this is used biblically. It's righteousness, innocence, justice. Okay, all of those legal type of terms apply to this word. In modern Judaism, they often will use the term tzedakah to mean charity, acts of kindness. They will call it tzedakah. Okay, because charitable acts are in accordance with the Torah, and so they consider that the charitable acts to be their righteousness. Okay, but it's not really used in the scriptures in that sense. In the sense of charity, it's more in the sense of that you're innocent, that if someone were to accuse you, you would be found blameless. Okay. And just so you have a word with a final tzadi in it, this is a good one to know. Encounter it many times in the scriptures. An ayin with a tzera beneath it, and a final tzadi, pronounced eitz, or just eitz if you don't wish to choke yourself while you're trying to pronounce it. Eitz is a tree. Yes.
But I was just wondering, as I'm going along here, is there a place where you can like look up stuff and kind of almost like look the letters practice?
Oh, so you're looking for exercises. I actually have some kind of homework things made up already. I could give those to you. There's also Probably if you did I can't recommend one in particular, but I know that there are resources online where people just have free little kind of Hebrew self-tutoring things. So if you Googled something along those lines, Hebrew self-teaching online, something or other, they've got little exercises you can do. They'll give kind of flashcard things, or shows you a word and you pronounce it, and then you can click and you can hear them pronounce it. So there are things like that. I don't have one offhand that I know of that's good because I haven't used any of those. But I know people that have used a number of different ones. There's also apps for your phone. If you have a phone that does that sort of thing, there's apparently a bunch of apps for that now. I'm totally out of technology realm. My phone is quite primitive by many standards today. So, but I know there's a lot of great resources, free resources out there that can help with that. I wish I could point you in a particular direction, to recommend one, but there's a lot of stuff like that. And if you'd like, I can try to dig up what homework stuff I have. So.
There are apps that are available that it'll have the Hebrew letter, and if you touch on it, then it will actually verbally say it. So it'll show like Aleph, you push it, Aleph. And it'll go through each of them, and it's nice because you've got a moment, you kind of go through it, and as you keep going through it, you start to pick up on more, it becomes more normal, and then you can start building off of that, and then you can start going to words, and understanding more how to apply it to words. But just the basis of it is very helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah, much easier than the days of flashcards, although, there's something to be said for writing it down yourself and all that kind of thing. But yeah, having that availability is a really helpful thing. And actually, there's someone here who has, it's very different from this kind of class because it's more conversational Hebrew, but he's going through Rosetta Stone Hebrew, which he says is very good, but it's more geared toward conversation as opposed to biblical study. So, because you're learning words like television and words of utility now, but not of special use in studying the scriptures. So. Okay, so that's the tzadi and the kuf. Our next letter is the resh. And the resh makes the sound of the letter R. My understanding is that originally the resh made the sound of a rolling R, so the r, like in Italian. Okay, the rolling R, or even the double R in Spanish. Kind of that r. It's difficult for me to do because I don't do that on a daily basis. But anyway, in modern Hebrew, it's simply pronounced as an R, as we think of an English R. Although it would be the Midwestern pronunciation of an R, not the Great Britain, New York, or any other dialect's pronunciation. It doesn't become oi. It doesn't become ah. It's actually ra. So the resh is the most commonly confused letter. I mentioned this when I went over the dalet. Resh and dalet, you can see why. There's a lot of confusion, especially when you have a font that writes a dalet something like this. Creates a lot of ambiguity. So pay very close attention to the top right corner whenever you find a letter that looks anything like this. You won't really confuse it with, say, a vav. Okay, the top is much shorter on a vav. Okay, so that won't really be a problem. And of course, a kaf or anything like that has something on the bottom, so no problems there. And a yod is much, much smaller than a resh, although it has exactly the same shape. So, but you will confuse it with the dalet, I guarantee it. I have many times. And even, I've mentioned before, even scribes, Hebrew scribes have confused these two letters one with another. So, something definitely to be aware of. Okay, numerical value of resh is 100. No, I'm sorry, I didn't go over the numerical value of kuf. I forgot to mention that. The numerical value of kuf is 100. Okay, so here, kuf is 100. Resh, now we started going 1 to 10. Once we reach 10, we counted by 10s. And once we reach 100, we start counting by hundreds. So kuf is 100, and resh is 200. In Paleo-Hebrew, the resh looks something like this. Sometimes you'll see a little addenda down there. And the Hebrew word rosh means a head, so that is what this is depicting, is a head. Flip it around, and it becomes the Greek rho, which makes the same sound. And eventually the Latin R. And so the resh is part of a lot of very significant words. Rosh, which means head, as I mentioned, although I'll go over that when we go over the sheen. Some other words of that you'll encounter frequently. Aleph, followed by a vav with a cholam, followed by a resh. So the aleph is silent. Vav with a cholam is a long O sound. The resh is an R, so this would be pronounced or. And or means light. Okay, so let there be light. Yehi or, phrase in Hebrew. And or is thought to be the basis of the name of Aaron, although Aaron is spelled a little differently. Aaron in Hebrew is Aharon, and I'm not sure which combination of vowels actually this is. I suspect it's probably something like this, but don't quote me on that. Aharon, okay, the brother of Aaron, the first high priest. It's thought to come from or. So it would mean enlightened one or something to that effect. Or the light bearer, maybe. Yeah, and that is the name Aaron. Okay. Okay, so any questions about the tzadi, the kuf, or the resh, or any of the words that I've covered so far? No? All right. Okay, now there is a special class of vowel that I want to talk about today as well, and these are called the chataf vowels. There are exactly 3 of them. And I believe actually I need to cover the shva first, because if I haven't covered the shva, then I've done this out of order. So I'm going to go ahead and cover the shva. So forget the chataf vowels temporarily, and I will talk about the shva. The shva vowel appears below a letter, and it's 2 dots, sort of stacked vertically like that. And the shva vowel, it can make 2 different sounds. It can either be silent, or what I would call a very short E. It's barely a sound at all. It's just a little eh. Okay, it's not even a full eh. It's just kind of a squeak almost. Basically, there are rules governing when you don't pronounce it at all and when you pronounce it very slightly. I'm not going to go into those right now because they're complicated and they have to do with, you know, memorizing how syllables function and a bunch of technicalities that just kind of bog you down at this point. So, for all intents and purposes right now, you can think of the schwa as representing the absence of any other vowel sound. Okay, so when you see two words, two letters adjacent to each other, okay, and a schwa is under the first of the two letters, just run those letters together. So if you see a bait followed by a resh, okay, and there's a schwa under the bait, think of this as BR as in brown. Okay, it's just connecting the two consonants together. Now technically a lot of times it'll actually give this little pause in between, so bira, okay? But for right now, you can think of it as just the absence of another vowel sound. And when we get into intermediate Hebrew, I'll go into more, well, and that might even be advanced Hebrew when I get into the technicalities of that. But anyway, when you see this schwa, that's what it represents, is no vowel here. It seems kind of silly on a first glance to have a vowel that doesn't make a sound. However, there is a good reason for it, because the schwa, when you start adding things to words, adding prefixes, adding suffixes, vowels within the word will actually change. And so sometimes vowels will change to a schwa, and sometimes they'll change from a schwa. So there is a reason to actually have a marking there. It's sort of a placeholder letting you know, okay, this can change to something else in certain cases. Okay? So, like I say, there's a lot of technicalities that go along with the schwa, but you can think of it as just making no sound at this point. Just connect the consonant that it's underneath to the consonant that comes right after. Okay? Good example of a word that contains a schwa would be, this is mem with a chirik, followed by a tzadi. Here's our schwa. A vav with a kametz, and finally a he. Okay, so we've got M for the mem, short I for the chirik. The tzadi makes our TS or TZ. Schwa makes no sound, so nothing for the vowel sound. Vav makes a V. And then the short A, the kametz. Okay, so this would be pronounced mitzvah. So the ts and the v are sort of just running into each other. There's no vowel sound in between them. Actually, you'll frequently see this written with a Z. So, but neither way is correct or incorrect. It's simply representing a tzadi. Okay, so this is kind of how the schwa functions. There's no vowel sound between here and here, so it just acts as a placeholder. Okay. Any questions about the schwa? Okay. All right. Okay, so now that you know what a schwa is, I can explain the chataf vowels. Chataf would be the ch. It's a chet. Okay, as I mentioned, there are exactly 3 chataf vowels, and they look an awful lot like 3 other vowels. Okay, so this is a chataf kametz. This is a chataf patach. And this is a chataf segel. And it looks just like a kametz with a shva next to it, a patach with a shva next to it, and a segel with a shva next to it. And that's because that's exactly what it is. These vowels make the exact same sound as their counterparts without the shva. Okay, so a chataf kametz makes the exact same sound as a kametz. A chataf patach makes the exact same sound as a patach, and a chataf segel makes the exact same sound as a segel. Okay, so and eh. I know Hebrew's probably frustrating to a lot of people thus far because we've got all these duplicate sounds, silent letters, all this kind of business. Although I will say it's much less frustrating than trying to learn English if you already know a different language. Why is a GH silent? I don't know. But why is it pronounced in ghost? I don't know. Okay?
Some of the deriving from different words, as far as like American comes from, one of the things we teaching my son who has diagnosed autism was that some of the words still come from other countries.
Right. Yeah, and also I know why some of those do exist, like the silent K in knife. Originally it was pronounced, and it fell off, but the spelling remained the same. So, I'm all for changing the spellings of words that are that have letters that are no longer pronounced, but you won't pass your English class very well doing that. So, but anyway, so yes. Again, understanding why these exist, you have to understand some things about the rules about the shva. And since I'm not going into those, I can't really go into these. But what I am going to let you know is that these do exist, and you'll find them somewhat frequently. And the main thing you need to know about them right now is what sound they make. Okay, so just think of this as a kametz, think of this as a patach, and think of this as a segel. And again, the reason they exist is because there are situations where vowels change, and so there are just very special cases where it changes to this so that you know what to do with it when it changes again. Okay? The vowel system came after the letters, long after. Vowels were always pronounced, but the method of writing them came after, and so they came up with certain conventions to do it certain ways. And once you understand all the rules behind it, it does make some sense. But in the meantime, you're left wondering why there's all these duplicate sounds and things of that nature. So again, there will be a time when I go over the rules for this and why it happens this way. But I'm not gonna bog you down in those technicalities right now, as we're just trying to learn the letters and the sounds they make and pronounce words. So just be aware that these exist. Know what they're called: chataf kametz, chataf patach, and chataf segel. And you'll just know that you're going to encounter these. In fact, probably the most common word in which you'll encounter one of these letters, or one of these vowels rather, is in the word Elohim. The first vowel in Elohim is, in fact, a chataf segel. And a cholam between the lamed and the hey, and a cherik followed by a yod for the last syllable. Okay, so Elohim. And Elohim, of course, means God. It can also mean God in the sense of lowercase g, although Hebrew has no uppercase or lowercase letters, so to know whether this is referring to the God of Israel or to the God of a foreign nation, you have to rely on context, which is always very obvious in the scriptures. So, So, again, this is a chataf segel. It makes the same sound as a segel, but you'll find it in Elohim, and you'll find those other vowels other places too. Okay? So, any non-technical questions about the chataf vowels? Okay.
So it'll only be with those, it'll only show up with those three vowels.
That's right. You will only find that with a kametz, a patach, or a segel. Okay, you won't find it with the tzera. You won't find it. You won't find two shvas. There's no hataf shva. It's only those three vowels that you'll find that combination with. If you do see it with something else, it's a misprint.
I forgot what the A sound is, the two dots.
The tzera.
Favorite.
Yeah, the tzera is the long A.
Is or is not.
You will not find it with that. You will only find it with these three vowels. Okay. So any other questions about anything at all? Preferably pertaining to the Hebrew language.
So back on Gomorrah.
Okay, yes.
Gomorrah. Why do you assume that it's written in English, Gomorrah, and that's how we actually know it in English?
Well, because why is Gomorrah spelled with a G in English, basically? Well, in the King James Bible, that's how they wrote it. They wrote, I don't know if it's one M or two, but that's how they transliterate it. To this day, the Gaza Strip is still written Gaza, okay? Even though in Sephardic Hebrew, the sound of the ayin has basically become silent. They barely pronounce that sound at all, but they still call it the Gaza Strip. And that is spelled like this. Okay, Gaza, right? So if they were to pronounce it the way they usually pronounce an ayin now, they'd call it the Gaza Strip. Okay, but they in fact still put that G there. So
Is it almost like it's a silent G, how they pronounce it, even in the upper Hebrew?
it's quickly becoming just like an aleph. It's quickly becoming just another silent letter. And it's kind of the same thing that happened with the comets, because the comets was originally, at least I think it was originally, a different sound than the patach. And the Ashkenazic Jews to this day pronounce the comets differently. They pronounce it as a short O. So the O is in pot, whereas the patach is the short A as in father. Okay, so it's a subtle difference, ah and ah. It's easy to see how those sounds blend together, and I think it's the same thing with the ghayan, because it's that really subtle sound. It just kind of fades into, just disappears.
So it has a lot to do with what you're reading too, because in some of the places that I was reading during my flock and rough that I like to do, I had a patach comments and it was being pronounced O, and I kept on like, where are they getting this O sound from? Where are they getting this O sound?
Yep, that's where it comes from, is the Ashkenazic dialect. And I suspect that, that's something closer to the original vowel sound, because why else would you have two different vowels that make the exact same sound? Now, English has vowel combinations that make the exact same sound, like AY and EY. Okay, both make the sound of I, although AY can make A, but EY can make A. So, English, to me, when you start thinking about it, English is way more confusing than Hebrew is. Hebrew, you've just got the different dialects, and you're dealing with the different alphabet, so that's the biggest obstacle there. But as far as rules, the rules are fairly consistent. You're not going to find a silent bait in a word or anything like that. Like the be in doubt. It's not just going to appear out of nowhere. And I mean, we grew up with this, and so it's just second nature to us, you know, although I'm sure it gave some of us trouble as kids. It certainly did me. Certain words, you know, I got used to certain combinations being silent real quick, but I mispronounced a lot of things growing up.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around what you just said. Because you just said that G is becoming a silent letter.
The ion is becoming a silent letter.
Okay, the I is becoming a silent letter. So would that mean that they are starting to have letters that used to make sounds but don't make sounds? And so it's a bit confusing?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Somebody who's learning.
things are definitely changing or have changed over time. The ion is kind of like teetering on the brink of becoming silent. It's taught as silent in a lot of Hebrew courses. But we know what sound it made because, you know, in the past it definitely made that guttural sound. But there's other things too, like the, well, we haven't gone over the tav, but the tav and the tate both make a T sound today. Okay, it's very possible that one of them made a slightly different sound at one point. The kaf and the kaf and the kuf, you know, I'm teaching them as the same sound, but it's very possible they made slightly different sounds at one point. The sin and the samech, we haven't gone over sin yet, but it makes an S sound just like the samech. So, you know, it's not impossible for there to be multiple letters that make the same sound. The veit and the vav, or, you know, the beit with no dagesh and the vav both make a V sound in Sephardic. So, you know, it's not that that's impossible. It's not that there's anything particularly wrong with that. It's just, I guess, not very efficient.
I'm thinking that if you're learning and you're learning it for scriptural base, you're going to have a lot of origin that you're saying as far as the sounds are going to be very traditional too.
Yeah.
But if you're looking at it in Hebrew today, then just like teaching Spanish in a class versus being immersed in it in society, they're going to speak differently.
Right. Yeah, there is definitely a bit of a chasm between biblical Hebrew and modern Hebrew.
Like Shakespeare and
Right. Yeah. Similar to, you know, Old English, Middle English, Modern English, although not that great of a chasm though, because some Old English is just unreadable to us today. You know, we look at it, we're like, what? You know, aside from the different spellings, I don't even know what that word's supposed to mean. You know, and actually, true Old English even had different letters. Got that, you know, AE looking thing, and they've got an F, which makes a TH sound, and so it's not that far of a divide because things are still pronounced roughly the same way, and you know they're still using the same pronouns. Okay, it's not you know, there's no going from thou to you, you know, problems or anything like that. So you know, a person who knows modern Hebrew can read the scriptures. They just, if they don't know some of the cultural background behind some of the terms, they may not interpret the scriptures totally accurately even though they know modern Hebrew. Okay, it takes a little bit of scholarship to look back and say, okay, now when they said Kodesh, what are they talking about? You know, because today, without a temple standing and without doing sacrifices and without that whole culture about things, you know, especially if you're not an Orthodox Jew who studies those things, you're going to perhaps derive a meaning a little different than what was intended. So, you know, it's like anything, any historical research. You know, it takes some work to figure out what they're talking about. You know, if we were to go back and read, read something from 50, 60, 70 years ago where they're using the word gay, and we were to ascribe modern meaning of that onto what they're saying back then, we'd be totally wrong. It's not at all what they were talking about. You know, meanings of things change over time. And so Hebrew has undergone some of that, but not to the same extent. So, you know, like I mentioned, tzedakah today meaning charity, where before it was more used in a legal context to mean innocence. Okay, and it's not that, you know, that meaning has not been lost. You know, the Orthodox still understand that meaning because they study the Torah. So,
Even is there, with the modern, when you talk, like, we have, like, kids, do they take off and do the slang, or are they more tradition too?
it would probably depend what household they grew up in.
I mean, I just didn't know if they have the same issue.
Oh, there's plenty of Hebrew slang, to be sure. Yeah, in Israel, there's all kinds of slang terms, just like anywhere else, you know. And a lot of them didn't exist in biblical at all. There's some, yeah. So there's, you know, there are some holes in the scholarship. There's still, that's why in different translations you'll find different translations. Looking through, say, the list of unclean birds in Leviticus 11, different translations will give slightly different variants of that. Well, is it an eagle or is it a falcon? Like, well, you know.
Don't eat either.
Right. In general, yeah, you know, the general principle, if you read through it, is like, well, if it's a bird that eats carrion, then you probably want to avoid it. But yeah, and especially words that are used very infrequently, like that list of. I use Leviticus 11 because it's a great example where you'll read different translations and you'll see slightly different. Okay, which kind of owl is it talking about here, as opposed to, you know, one will say this kind of owl, and one will say that kind of owl, you know, and that's just based on, you know, advances in whatever kind of ancient scholarship there is. But those words, though, the reason that there's some confusion is because some of those words are only used in that chapter. So they don't even have other verses to go to try to get a sense of, okay, you know, learning other things about this. So they're pretty sure they know what it is, but they're not like pinpoint accurate sure. So yes.
Our scroll Humash says just that. The rabbis say we just assume this is what they do.
Right.
You know, we have the Hebrew what it says, but exactly what it is, we're not sure.
Right. And you know, for most concepts in the scriptures, I've noticed that when something's real important, like if God really wants us to know something, He'll say it over and 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 over again. And so, you know, like when you read through the scriptures, you find the Sabbath command. It's not just there once; it's there like a bunch of times in the Torah alone, let alone the prophets who keep harping on it. You know, so that's kind of important to him, you know, to say the least. That's a very significant thing. So anyway, so yeah, concepts like that, concepts like righteousness, concepts like holiness, you know, loving your neighbor as yourself, you know, these are things that are just drilled into the scriptures. And so a lot of the things where there's a question, you know, even things that at one time were probably known very definitely, oh, it means exactly this bird. And now we're kind of a little uncertain. You know, there's kind of enough context around those parts to know, okay, this is the focus here. You know, this is the important part of this. So the scholarship will continue, the research will continue, and they're getting closer to things. You know, the King James Bible is famously cited as using the term unicorn in a couple places. Although that's another funny thing. They didn't mean a horse with a horn when they said unicorn. They literally meant an animal with one horn. So if you go back and look at that, they're not quite as...
Well, I'm under the impression from working at a Bible bookstore, and we were told, even with that, with the translations of the Bible, that, from my understanding, King James would not sign his name to any of the Bibles at that time, that there was a lot of people being killed for translations, that there was a lot going on in that time. So to have, you know, just like King James, and then when we go into explaining like New Living Bible and NIVs, where they take and look at scriptures from, you know, the King James Version versus like with the Amplified that goes back to the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of, you know, I mean, there are hundreds of translations out now. with varying degrees of accuracy and, you know, shall I say, rigorousness of scholarship. Okay, there's a number of versions that, frankly, are just really suspect. But a lot of them are real good faith efforts. And, you know, I think the King James Version was a good faith effort. You know, they now, regardless of what doctrinal ideas may have been imposed in various places, or which, you know, I mean, once you get into trying to figure out, you know, well, yeah, things like that, but then different manuscripts, you'll find one Greek manuscript that has 2 words, you know, here, and another one that's missing those 2 words. So do you put them in? Do you take them out? You know,
So
those are all...
understand does not mean accurate.
I would not say so, no. That easy to understand means accurate. Although, I think a translation that's easy to understand is a noble goal, and that's a good thing. But yeah, like... okay, let's just say there are some translations out now that really try to amplify the language and try to modernize the language. And I'm not saying updating thou and thee to you, okay? I'm saying they will use present-day English slang or present-day English idioms to translate concepts like in Paul's letters. And I take a bit of an issue to that because that couldn't be what Paul meant because Paul didn't know modern-day English slang or modern-day English idioms, you know. Now, if you use the Hebrew idea he would have been using, a modern English reader would be lost and say, well, what is he talking about? But that, to me, that's not necessarily a totally bad thing because that would force them to look into it, to, you know, to try to figure out what he's talking about. And that would leave them with a much greater understanding than just a, you know, a bland reading through. But not only that, but there are certain verses that even if you don't understand all the idioms, you can still get the gist of it, like the Sermon on the Mount. You know, that's loaded with idiomatic expressions and phrases. But, you know, blessed are you when people persecute you and that kind of thing has kind of a universal understanding. You know, you don't have to be familiar with Jewish culture to understand what he's telling you to do and the principles that he's trying to get you to live by. So, okay.
In 3 minutes, explain why the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew.
Why the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew. I'm not going to confidently make that claim. However, there are certain parts of the New Testament that seem very likely to me that they were originally written in Hebrew. For 2 reasons. Number 1, every author of a New Testament book was Jewish. And so every author of a New Testament book spoke Hebrew. And they still read the Torah in synagogues, which was in Hebrew. And they're communicating to, a lot of the books are specifically written to other Jews who would have also spoken Hebrew. Okay, now the epistles of Paul, perhaps not. But perhaps. Okay.
In mind, it had to be interpreted from Hebrew.
Right. Paul's thinking in Hebrew foremost because that's his first language. Or at least I would contend that that's his first language, although I'm sure there are some who would disagree. But clearly he knew the Torah in Hebrew. That's because that's the Torah that was available to him was in Hebrew. Yeah. Certain books like John use some Greek metaphors that seem to indicate that it was actually originally in Greek. But other books like Matthew use a lot of Hebrew idioms, which seems to indicate it was originally written in Hebrew. And in fact, in the case of Matthew, they have a manuscript that's in Hebrew, or several manuscripts. So the question is that original? Is it based on a copy of a copy of a copy that was originally Hebrew, or is it a back translation from the Greek? So it's a valid question. I'm not a Hebrew scholar or a Bible scholar by any means, but I do keep up a little bit with these things. So yeah, I wouldn't go so far to say the entire New Testament was originally written in Hebrew, but I would say that some of it probably was. And I would love it if the entire thing was. That would make my word studies a whole lot easier. Track one Hebrew word all the way through the Bible. So anyway, I think we're out of time for today, but or for this class anyway. So I hope to see you all next week. Shalom.